With tensions running high in the South China Sea over territorial rights, the Philippines offered a direct challenge to Beijing by instructing its Coast Guard to haul away a Chinese barrier. Last May, the Philippine Coast Guard has placed navigational buoys within its exclusive economic zone or EEZ to assert sovereignty over the disputed Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. The Philippine Coast Guard set up 5 buoys carrying the national flag from May 10 to 12 in 5 areas within the 200-mile and 322-kilometer economic exclusive zone, including the Whitsun Reef, where hundreds of Chinese maritime vessels moored in 2021. The Philippines National Security Council will publish an updated Philippine map highlighting the country's maritime entitlements as underway in line with the 2016 Arbitral Ruling and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The new standard map that will counter China's 10-line map is crucial in terms of determining the extent of Philippine territory that is free for safe navigation and implementing environmental protection programs, according to the Armed Forces of the Philippines. This move highlights the Philippines' unwavering effort to resolve and protect its maritime borders and resources and contribute to the safety of maritime trade. Faced with China's determination to exert control over a vast area of the South China Sea far from its mainland, the Philippines had taken matters into its own hands, taking down a Chinese barrier that had kept Filipino fishing boats at bay. As a maritime nation, it is imperative that the Philippines prioritizes the maintenance of navigational safety to ensure the protection of its waters and the people who navigate the area. The current updated version of the administrative map of the Philippines includes the Calayan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, Macclesfield Bank, West Philippine Sea, and Benham Rise region. AFP spokesperson Colonel Medel Aguilar said the map, which abides by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, will be important in giving Filipinos pride and responsibility to preserve the Philippines' territory. This is the first time the Philippine government will publish an updated map showing the country's maritime entitlements, 7 years after the United Nations-backed Arbitration Tribunal ruled some rock features in the Spratlys form part of the Philippines' EEZs. Over the past 2 decades, China has occupied a number of reefs and atolls across the South China Sea, building up military installations, including runways and ports, which have not only challenged the Philippines' sovereignty and fishing rights but have also endangered marine biodiversity in the highly contested resource-rich waterway. Already, more than 900 miles from their mainland, the Chinese have established a military base on Mischief Reef, off the Philippine island of Palawan, complete with radar domes and a runway that can handle fighter jets. China reaffirmed its claim over the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea after the Philippine government removed the floating barrier to prevent Filipino fishing boats from entering the area. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said the shoal and its adjacent waters are China's inherent territory, and therefore Beijing has indisputable sovereign rights in the disputed waters. However, the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea invalidated China's historical claims over the disputed waters of the South China Sea. The tribunal dealt with the question of whether China's claims to historic rights within the 9-line, now 10-line, were in conformity with UNCLOS. It was first observed that this area, in which China claimed rights, formed in the long historical course to living and non-living resources like fisheries and petroleum resources, partially overlaps with areas that would otherwise comprise the exclusive economic zone or the continental shelf of the Philippines. In the view of the tribunal, UNCLOS establishes a comprehensive maritime zones regime and allocates rights in these areas to the coastal state and other states. In the areas of the EEZ and the continental shelf, the coastal state enjoys exclusive sovereign rights to the exploitation of living and non-living natural resources. Concerning the rights of other states in these areas, the tribunal found that UNCLOS does not permit the preservation of the historic rights of any state within the EEZ or the continental shelf of another state. Therefore, after the entry into force of UNCLOS, the historic rights that might have existed for China within the 9-line in areas that would otherwise include the EEZ or the CS of the Philippines were superseded by the maritime zones regime created by UNCLOS. That means the pre-existing historic rights no longer exist as they are not compatible with UNCLOS. Accordingly, the tribunal concluded that China's claims were contrary to UNCLOS and exceeded the geographic limits imposed by it. The award addresses 3 main substantive issues. First, the so-called 9-line and China's claim to historic rights in the South China Sea. Second, the status of certain maritime features in the South China Sea, and third, the legality of Chinese activities in the South China Sea. In marking the 7th anniversary of the South China Sea ruling on July 12, the United States, Japan, and India urged China to follow international law and stop harassing vessels of claimant states operating in their exclusive economic zones. Other countries, including the United States, Vietnam, Australia, and Japan, backed the Philippines and called on China to respect the tribunal's decision. On the other hand, Cambodia supported China's non-acceptance of the award. As far back as 2016, through the landmark ruling, it has been established that there was no legal basis for China to claim historic rights over the Philippines' exclusive economic zones. It has also been proven that China breached its obligations under international law when it violated the Philippines' sovereign rights over its continental shelf and EEZ. Under the terms of the convention, this ruling is final and legally binding on the Philippines and the People's Republic of China, according to the statement of U.S. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller, declared on the anniversary of the South China Sea arbitral ruling. The U.S. reaffirmed its July 13, 2020 policy regarding maritime claims in the South China Sea, as they urge Beijing to comport its maritime claims with international law as reflected in the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention. In observance of the 7th anniversary of the ruling, Japan also reiterated that the award is final and legally binding on the Philippines and China, the parties to this case, and both are required to comply with the award. The minister said Japan highly appreciates the Philippine government for having consistently complied with the award and shown its commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes in the South China Sea. From the peaks of the Himalayan mountains to the shoals of the South China Sea, China lays claim to a vast territory, and a new national map produced by Beijing is the latest expansive conception of its borders to outrage its neighbors. The Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, and India, all of which have territorial disputes with China, have objected to the 2023 version of the country's standard map, released on the 28th of August by the Chinese Ministry of Natural Resources. The map includes a U-shaped line that reaffirms Beijing's claims to sovereignty over almost all of the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, a resource-rich and strategically important region through which trillions of dollars in trade flows each year. The line extends into the exclusive economic zones of a number of countries. At least 6 neighboring countries have objected to China's new standard national map, which features a 10-dash line, instead of the previous 9 dashes, used to stake claims on the South China Sea, with an additional dash to the east of Taiwan. The new map repeats the 9-dash line claims made by China and rejected by the United Nations Law of the Sea Tribunal, while also claiming new territory around Taiwan and to the north of India. The Philippines already challenged the then 9-dash line drawn by China before the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The court had invalidated Beijing's sweeping claim. On August 28, a day later, the Philippines Department of Foreign Affairs issued a statement that it rejects the 2023 version of China's standard map. Because of its inclusion of the 9-dashed line, now a 10-dashed line that supposedly shows China's boundaries in the South China Sea. This is the latest attempt to legitimize China's purported sovereignty and jurisdiction over Philippine features and maritime zones, which has no basis under international law, particularly the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 2016, the Hague Tribunal sided with the Philippines in territorial disputes over the South China Sea, but China refused to recognize the ruling. The new map also sparked sharp reactions from India, Nepal, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Taiwan. India lodged a strong protest through diplomatic channels with the Chinese side on the so-called 2023 standard map of China that lays claim to India's territory. A spokesman for India's External Affairs Ministry said Wednesday in a statement, "They reject these claims as China has no legal basis. Such steps by the Chinese side only complicate the resolution of the boundary question." Malaysia's foreign ministry also rejected China's unilateral maritime claims, and said that the new map encroached upon Malaysia's claims in its states of Sabah and Sarawak. Malaysia does not recognize China's claims in the South China Sea, as outlined in the China Standard Map 2023 edition, which covers Malaysia's maritime area, the ministry stated. Accordingly, the map is in no way binding on Malaysia. Meanwhile, Taiwan affirmed that it isn't a part of China and said that Beijing has never ruled the island. No matter how the Chinese government distorts its claims to Taiwan's sovereignty, it cannot change the objective fact of Taiwan's existence as an independent country. The CCP, which rules China as a one-party state, views Taiwan as a renegade province that must be united with the mainland by any means necessary, even though Taiwan has never been ruled by the CCP and has its own democratic government. Vietnam's Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Phan Tu Hang, said in a statement that China's new map violated Vietnam's sovereignty over the Paracel and Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. China's sovereignty and maritime claims based on this dotted line, as showcased in the map, are null and void. Such claims go against international law, particularly the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The United States has no direct territorial claims of its own, but it has made its own interests clear, including the freedom of navigation. On Monday, President Biden hosted the leaders of 18 Pacific Island nations at the White House in another sign of the growing regional competition for influence between Washington and Beijing. The waters of the South China Sea were long dominated by the U.S. fleet, but as the Chinese military flexes its muscles, and as its Navy and Coast Guard continue to gain strength, concern has grown about the possibility of a superpower showdown in the disputed waterway. China's efforts to bully its neighbors into assenting to its demands and preferences have failed, and led Asia's democracies to deepen security cooperation with the United States. Since the dawn of international politics, smaller states have faced the formidable challenge of navigating great power rivalries. Today, it is the geopolitical contest between the United States and China that has compelled countries to balance their competing national interests. Toward which side they gravitate depends on domestic and external circumstances. Consider the Philippines, which has an interest in maintaining both its growing economic ties with neighboring China as well as its half-century-old security alliance with the U.S. The Philippines' last president, Rodrigo Duterte, placed greater emphasis on the Chinese, turning sharply away from the U.S. and toward China after his election in 2016. China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea has made it virtually impossible for Duterte to push his pro-China and anti-U.S. agenda. Duterte's successor, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., has so far taken a more prudent strategic approach. Deeply concerned about the territorial disputes fueled by Chinese claims in the South China Sea, Marcos has decided to reaffirm and enhance his country's partnership with the U.S. To this end, the Philippines has decided to grant the U.S. access to 4 more military bases, for a total of 9, with additional sites in the future, some of which are located near disputed areas of the South China Sea. American troops rotate regularly through the designated bases. The U.S. and the Philippines have also agreed to resume joint patrols in the South China Sea, which, under Duterte's, were suspended for 6 years. Beyond the U.S., the Philippines and Japan recently agreed to deepen defense ties, with Japanese troops securing greater access to Philippine territory for training and logistics. Moreover, the Philippines is pursuing greater maritime cooperation with the United Kingdom. The two countries held their inaugural maritime dialogue on February 7. 2 weeks later, the Philippine Defense Minister agreed with his Australian counterpart to formalize their strategic defense engagement, potentially including joint patrols in the South China Sea. So, the Philippines is gradually becoming a key hub of military cooperation among Southeast Asia's democracies. The United States military kicked off 2 weeks of multilateral exercises with its Philippine allies and multiple international partners on Monday amid rising tensions between Manila and Beijing over territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Maritime training activity Sama-Sama 2023 is the 7th and largest iteration of the drills, with participants from Australia, Canada, France, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Malaysia, joining the U.S. and the Philippines, according to U.S. Navy press release. Sama-Sama Maritime Drill features more than 1,800 personnel from the participating countries, many aboard warships from the Philippines, the U.S., the UK, Japan, and Canada. The exercises will take place in the Philippine Naval Force's southern Luzon area, with headquarters on the country's Pacific coast, almost 480 kilometers southeast of Manila and about 900 kilometers from the Spratly Islands. This maritime drill will run through October 13. Participating assets include the U.S. Navy's dry cargo ammunition ship, USNS Wally Shira, Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Dewey, and a maritime surveillance aircraft P-8 Poseidon. along with the Philippine Navy's BRP Antonio Luna, Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces JS Akabono, and the Royal Canadian Navy frigate HMCS Vancouver.